when you're in some of these meetings, leadership meetings, and talking through some of the different strategies and ideas, there's this fundamental difference I've seen, at least in my experience, between the different C-suite leaders and especially the technology and engineering leaders. Um, um, and those differences, I believe, are healthy, though, right? If all the business leaders look at a proposal or look at an initiative the exact same way, I'll go out on a limb here. Somebody's not doing their job, right? If there's this total harmony and peace, I'd say somebody's probably not stepping up and doing their job. There should be a healthy friction that drives balance.
Welcome to the Information Week Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Pierre. In today's episode, we're talking about dealing with the board, facing strategic technology rejections. Sometimes the best intentions with a strategic technology plan can still lead to a rejection by the rest of the C-suite or the board at a company. Now, there may be other interests that need to be considered, explanations and training to account for, or the price tag could just be too high. So how do C-suite tech leaders handle such rejections and, when their intent is actually to help the company? So to dissect this conversation, we are joined today by Brian Blakley, CISO for Bellini Capital. Brian, good to be seeing you.
Good to be here. Thanks, JP.
And once again, we are joined by friend of the show, Pierre DeBois, CEO of Zimana Analytics. Pierre, good to be seeing you again.
JP, great to be here, Brian, and terrific to have this conversation with you. Looking forward
Likewise.
to it.
For sure.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So, gentlemen, thank you again for being here with us. So, looking at dealing with strategic technology rejections that might come up, both of you, let's talk about how you've handled either, being on the side where you've had to, be the one to say, hey, no to strategic tech proposals, or have had to be the one you're trying to push a strategic proposal to, the C-suite or the board, and that have dealt with pushback. Brian, why don't you start us off with your experiences?
Rejection, JP. What? They always say yes, right? No, I've had plenty of proposals in budget get rejected. And earlier in my career, I would usually walk out thinking, hey, they just don't get it. They just don't understand the risk. But I learned that was the wrong conclusion, right? Most of the time, leadership did understand that the risk was real, but what they didn't trust was my framing or the timing or the business case. So when a proposal or budget gets rejected, I don't look at it as a defeat. It's more like feedback. So I asked myself, did I frame this as a security or technology problem, or more as a business decision? Because those aren't the same thing. If I walk into that room saying and jumping up and down, we need this tool, right? I'm asking them to fund activity. But if I say, here's the critical business function exposed, here's the revenue or operational impact, here's a couple of options, here's the risk we're accepting if we do nothing, now I'm helping them make an executive business decision based on business impact and business risk. And to me, that distinction really, really matters. I also try to understand what caused hesitation. Sometimes it's just a hesitation. Was it the budget, like you said, the big number? Was it timing, competing priorities, friction, lack of confidence in the numbers? So those are all very different problems and need different responses. And sometimes the right move is to simplify the proposal or put it into logical phases. And sometimes it's to tie it more directly to things like the business goals and objectives, like increasing revenue or decreasing costs. And sometimes the answer, JP and Pierre, as you guys know, really is no. And when no happens, my job and my role, especially as a CISO, is not to get emotional or defensive or go into some sort of technology spiral. My job is to make sure that the decision makers understand the residual risk they're accepting by saying no. And that's leadership, not forcing a yes or trying to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but making sure that the business is making an informed decision, with eyes wide open.
I'll jump in if I can. And it's when I think about this topic, I also think about different points in my career. Even in engineering, I remember a time at Ford where a rubber component for a gear shift lever of a Ford Ranger pickup. They almost canceled the project, and I had to come to my supervisor and say, "Hey, look, I wrote this literally not quite on a napkin, but on a sheet of paper, just like Brian said, simply saying, hey, look, here's the dollar amount that we're going to save, which we will save if this project doesn't go through." And they picked it up. Brian's absolutely right. There is a lot of times, whether you're dealing with technology or anything that, particularly if it's engineered, any sort of engineered product, there's always a challenge in timing in terms of how much people are spending on their projects to get them out the door. And there's also a lot of, sometimes for management, there's always this sort of bottom line-ish type of deal. And I think the thing I had to learn over time was really kind of step in and just highlight what I think the issue is. Not taking it personally, like Ryan had said earlier, but definitely saying, hey, can you be specific on what the concern is that you're trying to address? Sometimes managers are forthcoming on it. Other ones, they tend to be more of a, let me think about it and reflect, which sometimes can also be a message saying, I don't know, but I'm going to come back to you with something. Either way, I think it's for wherever you are in management or how you relate to the management within your organization. Your best challenge is always, like Brian said, don't take it personally, but also figure out how your project fits to the overall objectives of the organization. It may not be as direct as a KPI, but it could be how you've situated your project and your project details against company KPIs and OKRs. How close you are into that universe can help strengthen the argument for keeping a project going, or it also can be a good starting point to say, hey, how essential is this project, and what's the timing that we need to do to get closer to those objectives and the key performance indicators that we're trying to protect for. So it's a lot of things are about timing and framing.
Gotcha. Right. All right. So obviously, a CEO is, must sign off on, what's going to happen next. But are there other essential stakeholders within your organizations that really must be part of getting convinced to see a type proposal get off the ground and move forward?
I think yes. The short answer is yes. There's usually another stakeholder beyond the one immediately. I like to say it's the invisible stakeholder, the IS. It could be again, and that stakeholder could be a supplier. If you're talking about components for something, or some sort of a third party that may be developing software associated with your project. There's always going to be a stakeholder beyond your immediate team and beyond the immediate management as well. And that can be tricky if the relationship between that third party and executive management is not going that well. I can say from my engineering background, I've seen that. And that's certainly something that plays into so many things with software today. But I think what you want to do is not get too much understand the politics, but not get too deep into it, and think a little bit more about how you can kind of make a win-win for everybody in terms of the project, in terms of project steps and what potential steps can be taken, basically. Again, this is another timing type thing as well. And yes, again, another way of how you're framing the project as a win-win for everyone that's involved.
Yeah, Pierre, you hit the nail on the head with layer 8, right? Everybody thinks there's 7 layers in the OSI model. Layer 8's the politics, right? And personalities that we have to deal with in the leadership level. And JP, the CEO might be the final decision maker sometimes, but they're rarely, to Pierre's point, the only person who decides whether a proposal will move forward. The key stakeholders are the people who either, from my experience, control the money, absorb the operational impact, own some of the legal exposure, or depend on the outcome that we're talking about. So first, I'd say the CFO matters a lot, or whoever that money decision maker is, not because every conversation is about dollars or costs, but because every proposal is a capital allocation decision, right? The CFO is asking, what does this protect and what's it cost and what's the trade-off? And then, like Pierre said, the others involved, right? The COO or operational type of leaders are critical too. They want to know whether this proposal is going to create friction for them, slow down delivery, mess up a workflow, right? A proposal that looks, I've had this recently, right? A proposal that looks really perfect from a security and compliance perspective can fail if operations sees it as like not practical or not doable. And then we have the good old legal and compliance nerds. I myself am one. Need to be involved, early when the proposal touches, especially things like regulated data, contracts, SLAs, those kinds of things. And most of the time, they're thinking about liability before anyone else is. And then if the technology supports sales or customer onboarding, and this is what Pierre was talking about a little bit too, manufacturing, payments, service delivering, or whatever, the leader of that function has to understand the risk in their language. I deal a lot with risk, right? And they're the ones, these business unit leaders, that are going to feel the business impact and usually feel it first. Last, I'd say that the technical delivery leaders, the engineering folks, got to be aligned, right? They understand architecture and integration complexity and resources, whether the business can actually do it, can actually execute. The mistake I see that security leaders make is treating, and this is at the CISO level, treating stakeholder alignment like too much like politics, Pierre, right? Where I don't really see it that way all the time. I see it more of as a translation challenge, right? Finance thinks in ROI, legal thinks in liability, operations thinks in continuity, sales thinks in velocity, technology thinks in how, right? Execution. So my role is to translate the risk, especially at the CISO level, into each of those languages so the business isn't just approving a proposal, but really has buy-in, right? They're aligned around the decision based on business risk and business impact.
So let's flip the kind of conversation a bit onto the other side of things. So you talked about, essentially trying to get the different stakeholders on board. Have you ever had to kind of rein in ideas that might be coming from the board or others in the C-suite? There might be ideas that they have for there's popular tech trends that are out there that they think might be worthwhile pursuing, but you, from that technical C-suite tech leader perspective, have practical concerns that you want to rein them in before they're trying to say, they're trying to present their options, their variations on tech strategy plans that have some issues that you want to kind of like rein in.
I would say I would say from an analytics perspective that comes up from time to time. Although it took a while to get to that point, I'll say that much. When I started my business back in 2009, it was a real education moment because you had to teach people like, what is analytics? Why is this so important? Why do we need to measure website performance? How does this fit in with marketing? How does this fit in for our business? Fast forward a few years, people finally picked up on that, but then it swung the pendulum way over to, well, we need to measure everything. And that's not what you want to do in a measurement, I would say measurement project for anything. You do need to tie it back to objectives. And doing that not only saves work, but also raises the question of why you're doing it. And I think that's the part that a lot of times gets a little messy with some conversations with people. Most folks have everyone has an idea of what they think that a certain technology should do for them. Sometimes it's an ill-informed insight into that technology, and maybe not even ill-informed on the technology, just ill-informed on the expectations of what they think should be happening. When we try to streamline things in this sort of bottom line, we must have the ROI, we must have the compliance and so forth. We can start glossing over the details of how you get there that could probably create extra cost or extra effort. So I agree with you there. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a challenge when it's an exec that has an eye on technology. And to what Brian had brought up a little bit, Brian definitely put the right word in there. And it could be, again, that's another form of politics brought in. But what you want to do is really tie things back to, it should be tying back to a KPI and OKRs, some sort of key performance indicator or some sort of objective key result. And because you start explaining how something should be fitting to a business objective that everyone has agreed to, rather than flipping to a technology just because a few people have a poor perception of how that technology will deliver for them.
Brian, have you ever had to kind of like rein in some ideas as a CISO that might be coming from others, where they're trying to present alternative tech strategy plans, and you just kind of like bring your, wait a minute, hang on, here's what we need to actually think about before doing these things?
Yeah, and part of, as Pierre was sharing that, it got me thinking about, over the years, when you're in some of these meetings, leadership meetings, and talking through some of the different strategies and ideas, there's this fundamental difference I've seen, at least in my experience, between the different C-suite leaders and especially the technology and engineering leaders. Um, and those differences, I believe, are healthy, though, right? If all the business leaders look at a proposal or look at an initiative the exact same way, I'll go out on a limb here, somebody's not doing their job, right? If there's this total harmony and peace, I'd say somebody's probably not stepping up and doing their job. There should be a healthy friction that drives balance, right? A CTO might be focused on like speed and product capabilities or market opportunities, right? The CIO perspective might be thinking more about integration, or the engineering, right? Integration, reliability, supportability. CISO's looking at exposure and those kinds of things. CFO's asking about costs and trade-offs, ROI. But those different perspectives can, and I think really should, create that tension. But historically, tension's not the problem. I think it's more like, I don't know how to put it, unstructured tension, right, is more the issue or the challenge. Because when a new technology is proposed, and I have, as a CISO, a security concern, I'm not the person saying, no, we can't do that. That's not helpful, right? And I probably won't be invited back. And it makes me look like a blocker, right? We don't want that. Instead, we say, and Pierre brought this up too, here's the business objective we're trying to enable. Here's the risk this technology introduced. Here are the controls and governance that make this acceptable. And here's the residual risk. Now we're not debating whether security likes the idea or not. Hey, Brian likes it, it's good. We're more deciding whether the business understands the trade-off. And I also believe the CISO, we have to separate, and this gets with some technology leaders too, and engineering leaders, separate personal preference from the leadership risk tolerance, right? There are things I don't personally love. Pierre probably can attest to this too. There's a lot of things I don't personally love from a technical purity standpoint, but if the business value is strong and the residual risk is understood and accepted, right, at the right level, my job is really to enable the business securely and not try to seek perfection. Because, and Pierre can probably attest to this, the best outcome isn't when security like wins an argument. Right, the best outcome is usually when the executive team makes a clear, informed decision. Right, move forward, slow down, add conditions, phase the rollout, or accept the risk. That's in my opinion what mature leadership looks like.
All right. Well, speaking of trying to make clear and informed decisions, the Ninja Turtles game screen is up for those who are listening as opposed to watching. That means it is now time for Questionable Ideas, our tabletop exercise where our panels will serve as interim executives at a fictional company called Questionable Ideas. These scenarios were not shared in advance with our guests, who are not responsible for the presence of goblins, kobolds, or gremlins here. That is entirely my fault. Okay, so once again, ground rules here for Questionable Ideas. Brian and Pierre, you'll both be serving as the same executive powers that you would assume to have as interim executives at this company, up to and including calling in for additional outside help and resources for the shenanigans ahead. Okay, are you ready, gentlemen? Okay, first scenario: the fast and the unsanctioned. The Goblins pitched an initiative to overhaul data management and telecoms across Questionable Ideas that they say would improve team responses overall. The board rejected the plan for risk and governance issues, primarily because of the inclusion of resources from unauthorized aggressor states. The goblins say the chips in the AI called obvious backdoor work faster and cost far less than the hyperscale resources on the approved list. Also, from their perspective, technology at its heart is agnostic. It shouldn't matter where the gear comes from as long as it works, is below cost, and we beat our competitors. So options here are, can you rehab this plan or start over from scratch?
I would say from my end, it is possible to rehab it. The reason why I want to focus on the agnostic comment, because that usually comes up in technology all the time. We hear that with AI quite a bit. We hear that with technology. That's historical, if anything else. Think of how the automobile was first invented. I still remember a story about oh God, I cannot think of Bonnie and Clyde. There was supposed to be a letter, I think, that Clyde had written to Henry Ford, thanking them for introducing the V8 in the Ford because it helped them to do getaways from the bank robberies that they were doing. That didn't stop. That Bonnie and Clyde did not stop the progress of the of automobiles and V8s. Basically, we still have V8s today. So it is rehabitable in the sense that you have to. It's good to think of it as tools as agnostic, but it's the application that makes it good or bad. And I think what makes it rehabitable is this whole getting them to sit down and think about what is it that's good about it, but also what are the risks that we are introducing with the technology. Which that's from Brian. I like Brian's phrase about that because a lot of times with tech, we're so focused on trying to make something so agnostic that we don't start acknowledging the risk that's being introduced by what we're introducing.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Pierre. And I support and echo a lot of what you shared too. JP, I look at this scenario and I'm the CISO, I'm the risk nerd. I barely have any organizational power to say yes or no. I'm to inform the risk. So I would definitely perform, and Pierre just shared this, a risk assessment and then inform the business, hey, here's the risks if we move forward, here's some compensating controls we can think about. But at the end of the day, my job is done once I get eyes wide open and everybody understands the risk moving forward so they can make the best decision possible. So that would be my role as a CISO in that scenario.
Well, not you allow the AI, the obvious backdoor AI to run across the company. Good job making plans for that. Okay. Scenario 2, Fortress Volcanus. The kobolds see the writing on the wall with the rising cost of AI and public pushback on data centers. The plan they pitched, which was rejected for safety and other concerns, was to burrow beneath the headquarters of questionable ideas to build a subterranean in-house AI data center. This would draw upon geothermal power, which the public shouldn't complain about. But there would also be some issues with cooling the system. And this dungeon-based AI data center would be nearly inaccessible to everyone, making it a challenge to repair or to update should there be a strategic change at the company. But at least it wouldn't be in outer space or under the ocean. Also, the kobolds want to use the excess heat from this plan to power a laser fence to protect the headquarters. So should you rehab or restart this plan from scratch?
That's a good one, and I struggle with the. I like the using the heat to create a laser protection system.
That energy's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, this still falls under a little bit of that, asking about what's the risk, and not pretending that it's a solution for something that appears good but can introduce something else. And I think the idea with this is really like sitting down and going back to the drawing board of what the data center should be doing for the organization, because that's a big part of these sort of decisions are, you're thinking about capacity and how that capacity will look like over time. And I think that just kind of making it subterranean it may be solving a public image problem, but it could also be recreating a different sort of problem. Let's say that the heat that's being dispensed from something that's subterranean might be impacting the soil, and let's say that the location they pick is not too far from a rural community that still wants to have farming available, and that soil might be at risk. I can say off the bat, in California, there's actually two towns who are, I can't remember the names of them off the bat. I think it's in Northern California, where one is getting a data center, but where the location of that data center is very close to town two, which was absolutely, they really did not want any of that coming in there. So the problem becomes some of the environmental issues from that data center can still impact them, even though it's really not within their jurisdiction. So we have to be, I think as companies, we have to really think about what is this environmental impact on data that data centers have, and then really sit back and figure out, making a choice that satisfies that, as well as satisfying the production needs for the organization.
Yeah, not much to add to that myself, Pierre. Again, my prior answer on assessing the risk is part of it, but also you see this sometimes with new technology, and people want to go all the way in. And in JP, your scenario, that would be, hey, let's start digging and let's start doing all this stuff underground, right? Maybe there's, beyond assessing the risk, there's a way to say, hey, could we do a proof of value here? Maybe we don't dig the hole underneath here, but maybe we can take this little safe spot, think like a sandbox. We can go over here and we can test some of this theory out and get a proof of value. You're seeing that a lot with AI right now. How can we show a proof of value, a proof of concept that this is really going to yield the results that we want? And then also want to frame some of the practical concerns around that. And this is where I get into the CISO nerdy stuff, but good old fashioned, hey, what's this technology touch, and who owns the decision, and what vendors are going to be involved, and what happens if it fails, and all those sorts of nerdy questions. But I would lean to keep momentum, because sometimes, JP, your scenario, I've seen it before, not cast in this specific scenario, but you see this sometimes where there's this half-baked technology idea, or we've seen it, the movie, many times over the years, right? Cloud this and single pane of glass and those kinds of things. And sometimes you don't want to kill momentum, but you do want to innovate with accountability, and that's where a proof of value and a risk assessment can help before you go all in and start digging the hole underneath of the building and relying on geothermal energy production in your example.
Well, Cobalts, we're hoping that you would be all about it, because it would seem that a dungeon-based AI and data center would be completely under the company's control, and that would mitigate all of these other issues. And if necessary, just trap the technicians inside the dungeon with the AI. So,
hey, over the years, I've spent a lot of time in dungeons where data centers, right? The basement, that's where we always were, right? Blinking lights, white noise, no windows, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. On to the last scenario. The unseeing eye. The Gremlins pitched a project they said was simple, but got quickly rejected. They wanted to make augmented reality smart glasses mandatory across questionable ideas to replace all laptops and desktop computers. This would push everyone to vibe code and to token max AI, because the Gremlins, who are already armed with sledgehammers, would destroy all the old hardware. Furthermore, no one has actually been trained in using these smart glasses, nor has anyone been consulted on how their departments would actually implement them. Can you rehab this plan, or should you restart it from scratch?
Brian, I'll let you go first on that one.
Thanks. Thank you, Pierre. This is another one of those instances where, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but where I'd probably want to rehab, but rehab based on facts. And the only way I can get the facts and push back is to say, hey, I've looked at the plan. Here's some of the material risks I see in the plan, and maybe we should collectively get together and decide, is this the path that we want to take? And is there a smaller bright size? Maybe we can pick a smaller unit within the organization. And again, is this going to yield the results, the outcomes, the business outcomes that we think it is? Those are the ideas anyway, JP, that I would challenge. And again, it's leadership is about asking better questions, not always being the smartest person in the room. So I'd probably have be that annoying 5-year-old in the room that's why and who and how and really trying to get down to trying to expose the material risks so that again that the business is going to make a decision based on these inputs. So it's incumbent upon us, I believe, as leaders to jump in front of it and say, hey, let's innovate with accountability and responsibly. It could yield real business value, right? I don't know, but let's get in here and ask the right questions, get the right people involved, and then the business can make a move forward. And again, I would lean heavily for this type of thing. Let's prove out that the concept is going to yield the outcomes and value that the business is looking to achieve, because I don't think it is.
Yeah, I love what Brian brought up about asking the right questions, because definitely when you're trying to replace everything with just one solution, that tends to leave out voices from people who really are attached to the current solution for a reason. Some people rely on screens, for it might be easier for them to work with, to even some things about disability as well too. So it's not just as simple as saying, let's throw the goggles on and let's rock and roll. As much as we love to have that, but I think this is something that happens for technology all the time. We tend to, I think, if you think about software, about how it gets introduced, there's never really an ad showing the use case at the very beginning. I use Evernote still, and I don't remember seeing any advertising for that. I use Claude today, and we still haven't seen a Claude ad yet, despite the irony of ChatGPT adding advertising in the model, but that's a whole other discussion. But the point is, we don't see advertising is supposed to show a use case that benefits the end user, the customer. We don't see that with software. Sometimes there's a tendency to just kind of throw the thing in there and not think about the end result. One last thing to also keep in mind about that example is that think about automobiles. The interfaces on cars right now, there is pushback about removing buttons for the sake of just having a screen in the instrument panel. There's Honda, for example, a few years ago had removed the radio knob. And just had enforced the driver to go into the user interface for that. Their customers pushed back on it so much that within the next year, they had to kind of do a quick refresh of the Civic and had to put the radio knob back into the instrument panel, basically. So there are true examples of things where pushing something too quickly doesn't mean that people will adopt immediately, and you have to look at why that pushback exists, which ties to Brian's great point about leadership, asking the right questions and elevating to get to certain things, to surface in the decision.
Okay. All right. Well, great job dealing with that. Unfortunately, the gremlins are still armed with sledgehammers, and they'll be carrying those off into their next misadventures. All right. Listen, Brian, Pierre, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I appreciate your insights and navigating the Questable Ideas tabletop scenario. You've both been fantastic.
Thank you,
JP.